future of Kevin Durant is quickly becoming the biggest story of the NBA offseason, as the Phoenix Suns seem intent on trading the future Hall of Famer, with them vastly underperforming in the past few seasons. Well, if one general manager would be crazy enough to take the leap at this point in his career, it very well could be Daryl Morey in attempting to bring Kevin Durant to Philadelphia. I want to talk about if that is remotely possible, what hoops the Sixers would have to jump through to make that happen, and sort of the outlook for if this is even worth considering given the context of where the Sixers are currently. Now, to dive right into things, we know that these whispers have been swirling for several months now. We did got this report coming back on April 2nd, so about 2 weeks ago at this point, that the Suns and Kevin Durant are expected to work on a trade out of Phoenix this summer. This is coming from Shams Charania. He says KD had interest in the Knicks, Timberwolves, Rockets, Spurs, and Heat at this past trade deadline. And it was interesting to me. I did not expect Durant to have seemingly more legitimate interest and kind of, I guess, momentum in being traded at the past deadline. Ultimately, it did not end up being the case, and it doesn't really matter much beyond that. He ultimately stuck with the Phoenix Suns, and they did underwhelm, missed that playoff push, and they're now forced to dig through the rubble here. Now, with all that being said, Kevin Durant was not the problem with that Phoenix Suns team. Kevin Durant was still Kevin Durant. To touch on his stats, that he averaged 26.6 points per game this year, 6.0 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1.2 blocks per game, shot 52.7% from the field and 43% from three, 50.6% on corner threes at age 36. That is still a very good basketball player. And I will hear the point. I was talking earlier on Fox Sports The Gambler, my guy Sam Ostry making the push that it does not translate to winning basketball at this point in his career. I hear that to an extent, but I also would just say when you look at this Phoenix Suns roster, there are a whole lot of problems far deeper than Kevin Durant. Hint, hint, Bradley Beal right next to him, which is the root of that there. Plus coaching, plus the lack of big man production, and even trading for Nick Richards. My point here being, Kevin Durant is still a very good basketball player. Now, when talking about him actually being moved out of here, there are a ton of really difficult CBA hoops to get through. That at minimum, it's going to require a 3-team trade just to make the money work a little bit. And for the Suns specifically, they're going to want a pretty significant return. They're at a pretty fascinating spot as a franchise, as they've basically, while the rest of the league has zigged in one direction, making sure that they are not touching these aprons or spending too much money, the Suns have zagged, saying, we don't care. We're going to bring in as much talent. We're going to deal with the repercussions. We're going to trade every draft pick and go for it. And what do they have to show for? Really nothing. Not even a play-in appearance in this specific season. Now, they will be going on their 5th coach in the past 5 years and trying to make things happen here. But I think the ultimate conclusion is Kevin Durant needs out of there if he wants a chance to play relevant basketball. They're going to have to figure out what to do with Bradley Beal, who, by the way, still has a no-trade clause. Absolutely the worst contract in sports and one of the biggest loser energy guys I can remember in my entire sports career. More so than Ben Simmons. I'm willing to put him on that scale because Bradley Beal just simply does not care. And with Ben Simmons, him not caring was him not there. Bradley Beal is there not caring, laughing at Steph Curry hitting shots on him, not playing defense whatsoever. Bradley Beal really made me mad this season. Now, to talk back on Kevin Durant here, the only real outcome that makes sense logistically to me, it is the Houston Rockets. And obviously they're preparing for their playoff series against the Golden State Warriors. But why that makes sense to me is because the Rockets hold the Phoenix Suns draft picks. And if you were trying to at least head sort of a semi-rebuild here, that's something that makes sense to me. Now, to put a little bit of a water on that theory, that Mark Stein tweeted earlier today that all season long on at the Stein line, we've been reporting that the Rockets' next significant trade would not happen in season, as proved true, and is unlikely to target Kevin Durant because the future Hall of Famer is not on the same timeline as Houston's promising young core. It is smokescreen season, and obviously the Rockets are preparing for a playoff series right now, so I'm not reading into this report too much. I think if anything that was put out there is sort of like let's stay locked in on winning in the playoffs, because to be completely honest, I do think Kevin Durant, I get he's older, but does fit their timeline, that this team is now ready to compete. So is Kevin Durant. And if you were to ask me the one big issue with the Houston Rockets is that they don't have a go-to guy in crunch time, that I don't trust Jalen Green to be that guy. Amin Thompson's still not a good shooter and still very early in his career. Amin believer, don't take that the wrong way. Alperen Sengun, a guy who's an incredible offensive creator to an extent, but not a guy that I believe can really get me buckets in the clutch time, like the caliber of player you need. That is what Kevin Durant does best. So that is something that makes sense to me. And to kind of pin it down here, that is logistically what I think makes the most sense. But to bring it back to the Sixers here, you better believe Daryl Morey is picking up that phone because that is what Daryl Morey does. And to give a little bit of more intel on that my guy RB Philly take tweeting out, just remember this was only 1 year ago, as Woj and Shelbourne detailed that Morey reached out to Rob Pelinka about the possible LeBron trade. However, Pelinka immediately began asking about Joel Embiid, and the conversation ended. Other names that Morey reportedly made calls for included Phoenix Suns stars Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And not too long ago, we also got this report, well, not even fully a report here, but I will say from ultimately Zach Lowe here, that Daryl Morey will be among, quote, the vultures circling the Phoenix Suns about possibly trading for Kevin Durant this offseason, said on his podcast. Quote, I'll tell you this, knowing Daryl Morey, he'll call about Durant. The vultures will circle Phoenix. He'll be a vulture. And that is my sense as well, that if Daryl, and that's his job. Like, I don't mean this as a slight on him. What Daryl does, what his job is to do, is explore every single avenue to possibly improve this Sixers team. And Kevin Durant certainly could be one of those. Now, the tough part about this conversation to me is we still have no clarity on the Joel Embiid outlook. That we know that he got his surgery, we know that he's recovering, and we won't really know any updates beyond that until we see him play basketball again. There is a world where Joel Embiid bounces back, or maybe not quite the version of himself, but is able to play, say, 45, 50 games next year and be maybe not, probably certainly not an MVP caliber player, but a all-star center, a guy that is a legitimate high-level championship contending foundational piece there. We can see Joel still be that, I'm hopeful for. There's also a world where Joel is unable to get back on the court at any sort of regular rate moving forward. If that second part is the case here, it doesn't make any sense to go after Kevin Durant, to be perfectly honest, because it's still going to take things to get him. Now, the root of this is probably Paul George as far as a contractual conversation to talk about the contracts with Durant specifically, which I always think are the most important part, because logistically with the NBA, you need the money to make it work, that it has to match up from a salary perspective, and of course the CBA adds more factors to it. You do cut some years off the overall contract with it. The Durant will be heading into the last year of his contract, a $54 million deal there. And for Durant specifically, I know he's extension eligible. It will be interesting if there is a little bit more of this, like, I guess, in general, sort of the precedent that has been set in the NBA to this point. And Bradley Beal, the guy who I just kind of crapped on earlier, a pretty clear example of this. You guys get their money, and then they cause the noise. Damian Lillard, another example of that. Guys that, like, I'm taking the max. I'm getting this money guaranteed on paper, and whoever's the guy signing the checks at the end of the day will work with that from there. I'm curious if Durant kind of takes the opposite approach here. And if any star is going to do it, by the way, I do kind of think it would be Kevin Durant, to be a guy that says, I'm not as worried about the money. I want to be in a place that is playing winning basketball. If that means making less money at the tail end of my career, so be it. Durant has made plenty of money playing basketball, and he is a guy that I still tip my cap for, who just loves hoops, man. And from a Sixers perspective, I do think that's something that's a little bit missing within this overall organization. We need guys that just love basketball, and Durant is pretty much at the top of that list. Even the stuff like going back and forth with guys on Twitter and talking basketball on Twitter, I think that's really cool of Durant, and it's pretty rare that you have that kind of access to that caliber of talent the way that he does. So I do think Durant sometimes gets a bad rap, but that doesn't make him any easier to trade for in this current context there. So something to note from the salary perspective there. I do think any sort of trade package would have to start with Paul George, but you also got to think about it from the Phoenix Suns perspective. Now, what the Sixers would have going in this conversation is I don't think the Phoenix Suns and Matt Ishbia specifically really have any idea how to run an NBA franchise. And I do think he's a pretty clear example of what, shout out to Ryan Russillo and Bill Simmons, who have dubbed the new ownership syndrome, where you just want to do things. You want to make the sexy signings. You want to make a splash to look like you're improving this roster and you're putting your fingerprints on this product that you're about to put on the floor. I think he got too over anxious doing that and now has to backtrack. But in backtracking there, what's your sell to the Phoenix Suns fan base that we're trading Kevin Durant and bringing back Paul George? Maybe you get a couple draft picks in the mix, stuff like that, some young talent there. I don't really think that makes sense, but at the same time, what other options are out there logistically? And when talking about the Sixers team, let's put Joel Embiid to the side, because I'm still optimistic, even in the worst case scenario with Joel, that the Sixers team isn't that awful of a spot. That Tyrese Maxey is a guy that plenty of franchises would be itching to have as a borderline centerpiece. Jared McCain is a guy that people forgot just how good he was in the brief stretch that we saw him this year, and I am confident he returns to that, and this is not nearly the best version of him. The draft lottery, still a huge part of this overall conversation, and if they can just keep that draft pick, get a guy in the top 6, that's potentially 3 young talents, foundational pieces to build around there. If you have that, That's something. That's something that a lot of other organizations would wish to have there. So bringing Durant in alongside those guys could be a little something building towards the future. Now, in this given context, for me, I think it's really dependent on the Joel Embiid outlook, and the Sixers should at least have a better feel for that than obviously we know publicly at this point. Ultimately, I think it's an incredible long shot that Durant and there's any real buzz between the Sixers and Durant here. I do think that when push comes to shove, that Houston will be the spot that he ends up and the trade will go down that way. But it's going to be tough to jump through those hoops, man. So this isn't as closed and shut of a conversation as I expected. I do firmly believe Daryl Morey will at least make the call and entertain the option there. But we will see what happens. It's going to be a hectic offseason, not just in Philadelphia, but across the entire NBA. And Durant certainly looking like the biggest domino that is set to fall to this point. The Phoenix Suns in itself are probably one of the more extreme examples. And by the way, shout out to the Phoenix Suns and the Dallas Mavericks for making me feel a little better about how the Sixers organization has been run these past couple years. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do want to hear from you guys overall. And before I sign off, did just want to point out the difference in comparing Paul George and Kevin Durant here. Yes, this would still be an update. And I know plenty of you, the anti-Paul George groups in the comments, which I totally hear you, totally get it there, would certainly be in favor of this as well. I mean, the efficiency splits off the charts for Durant still at this age, and a guy who straight up loves basketball. I get he's not perfect. I get he has his flaws, but I have a great deal of respect for Kevin Durant continuing to produce, compete, and carry himself the way he does, even it has been on a losing effort with this Phoenix Suns team. So drop your thoughts below on Durant to Philadelphia. Is this something you could see happening? Is this something you want to see happening? Drop those thoughts below. As always, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.